Ethan Calloway pressed his mother's cold hand to his forehead and swore out loud that he would never marry a single one of the women they had lined up for him. The doctors had already gathered their bags and gone. Her breath came thin now, slow, but her grip on his wrist was iron. "Promise me," she rasped. "Not for money, not for a name. Find one who's strong enough to stand when everything falls." He promised. Then she was gone. If you're watching this, subscribe and follow the story all the way to the end. And tell me in the comments what city you're watching from, so I can see just how far this story has traveled. She had held on longer than the doctors said she could. Ethan had sat by that bed for 11 days, and on the last of them she woke clearer than she'd been in weeks, and made him lean close. "You'll want to marry a Van Dorn," she said, "or a Kemble. Your aunt will push one at you before I'm cold. Don't you do it." "Mother, listen to me. I married your father for his name and his money because that's what my people raised me to do, and he did the same, and we were two strangers in a big house for 30 years, polite as churchgoers and lonely as gravestones. I don't regret you. I regret everything else." Her hand tightened. "I have watched you turn into a man who has everything and wants nothing, and it's because you were raised the way I was raised, to weigh a person like you'd weigh a horse. I won't die knowing I did that to you and said nothing. You're not dying. I'm dying today or tomorrow, and we both know it, so hush and hear me." Her eyes burned. "Don't marry soft. Don't marry pretty. Don't marry a girl who's never once had the ground go out from under her, because you'll never know what she's made of, and neither will she. Find one who's already been broke against something and didn't break. A woman who'll stand when everything falls. Promise me you'll wait for her however long wherever she is." "I promise." Say it back. "I'll wait for a woman who'll stand when everything falls, however long it takes." She closed her eyes then, and the clear light went out of her by degrees over the next hour, and her grip loosened on his wrist finger by finger, and when it let go altogether, he did not move for a long time. For 3 days after they buried her, Ethan Calloway did not speak to a soul. On the 4th day, his aunt came into the study without knocking, and he knew from the sound of her heels on the floor that the mourning was over as far as the family was concerned. "You've had your grief," Aunt Prudence said. "Now you'll have your sense back." "Sit down, Aunt. I'll stand. I won't be long. The Ashfords are still willing. So are the Kembles. The Van Dorns have written twice." She set a stack of letters on the desk in front of him, thick cream paper, every one of them sealed with a family crest. "Any one of these girls would make you a fine wife, and you know it." Ethan looked at the letters and did not touch them. "My mother wasn't cold a week." "Your mother," Prudence said, "was the one who spent 30 years telling you the Calloway name was the only thing in this world that couldn't be taken from you, and now you sit here like a widow at a window." That isn't what she said, not at the end. At the end, she was full of medicine, and half out of her head, God rest her. Prudence pulled her gloves tighter. "Whatever fever talk she gave you, don't you build your life on it. A man in your position marries well. That's all there is. Choose one before the season's out, or the whole city's going to say the land baron's gone soft." He stood up then, and though he said nothing sharp, the way he came around the desk made her step back. "You'll see the Ashford girl Thursday," she said, retreating toward the door. "I've already told them you'd call." "Then you'll go and tell them I won't." "Ethan." "Thank you, Aunt. Shut the door on your way." She shut it hard. He stood alone a long while after that, and picked up the top letter, and turned it over once, and set it down again without breaking the seal. He did go once. Not to the Ashfords. He could not stomach being handed to them like a prize hog at a county fair. But a month on, worn down, and half willing to believe his aunt might be right, he called on a girl named Cecily Vane because she'd laughed at something clever at a dinner, and for a moment he'd thought there might be a person behind the pearls. They were taking tea in her mother's garden when a groom came running to say a carriage horse had spooked in the yard and kicked a stable boy, and the child was hurt and crying out. Ethan was on his feet before the man finished. Cecily Vane put a hand on his sleeve. "You mustn't," she said. "The blood, Mr. Calloway. And it isn't our affair. The servants will see to it. A boy's hurt. There are men whose work that is. She said it the way you'd correct a child for reaching across the table. Do sit. You'll only be in the way, and you'll spoil your coat. He looked a long moment at the smooth, untroubled face that had never once in 20 years been asked to do a hard thing, and he understood his mother had been right down to the letter. He excused himself, went to the yard, held the boy's hand while the bone was set, gave the family money enough to carry the child through, and never called on Cecily Vane again. That was the last of his trying. After that, he only refused. The word she'd feared got loose anyway. Cities are small when it comes to gossip, no matter how many people crowd them. By midsummer, the story had made every parlor and every club. The richest unmarried man in the state had turned away 3 of the finest families in the country, and no one could say why. Some said he was ruined and hiding it. Some said he'd made a promise to a dead woman and let it rot his judgment. Some just said he was proud, and that pride would cost him. He heard it himself once at a supper he never should have gone to. "There he is," a man murmured to another 2 chairs down, not quite low enough. "The one who can't pick a wife. Can't or won't. Same thing at his age. My money says he dies alone in that big house with nobody's name but his own on the door." Ethan set his fork down, and the 2 men caught the sound and looked over and had the decency at least to color. "Gentlemen," he said, "you'll want to lower your voices or raise your courage, one or the other." Neither of them raised anything. He rose, thanked his host, and left before the soup was cold. He did not go to another supper after that. What ate at him wasn't the talk. He'd never much cared what a room full of soft men thought of him. What ate at him was that some part of him suspected they were right, not about the pride, but about the ending. He had everything a man could point to and hold up, and he woke every morning in a house so quiet he could hear the clocks disagreeing with each other from 3 rooms away, and he could not have said if a man had put a gun to him what any of it was for. His mother's words wouldn't let him rest. Find one who's strong enough to stand when everything falls. He had turned it over so many nights, it had worn smooth. He had looked God help him at the daughters they paraded past him, and he had asked himself the question. Honestly, each time would she stand, and each time the answer came back the same, because he had watched these girls faint at a raised voice, and weep at a cross word, and treat a rainstorm like the end of the world. They had never in their lives had a single thing fall. How was a man to know if they'd stand? He was still asking it the night he made up his mind to go. His man of business, a careful old fellow named Dorsey, came the next morning and found trunks in the hall. "You're traveling, sir?" "I am." "To Warren, west, out into the country. I couldn't tell you the town because I don't know it yet." Dorsey set his case down slow. "Forgive me, the Hartwell contracts close in 6 weeks. Your presence. You'll close them without me. You've closed harder ones. And if a family should call while you're... Then you'll tell them the truth, Dorsey. Tell them Mr. Calloway has gone looking for something, and he'll be back when he's found it, and not 1 hour sooner." He clapped the old man on the shoulder gentler than his words. "Don't look at me like I've lost my mind. Maybe I'm just now finding it." "May I ask what you're looking for, sir?" Ethan thought about that a moment. "A woman my mother would have been proud of. That's the whole of it. You could find such a woman here." "No," Ethan said. "I couldn't. I've looked here 5 years. Here there's nothing to fall, so there's no way to know who'd stand. Out there everything's falling all the time. Out there I'll be able to see." Dorsey didn't understand it and didn't pretend to, and that was one of the reasons Ethan trusted him. "How long, sir?" "Long as it takes." He rode west with 2 horses and a saddlebag of money, and no letters of introduction to anyone, which felt the first morning past the last paved road like taking off a coat he'd worn so long, he'd forgotten the weight of it. The country changed under him mile by mile. The great houses thinned, then the fair houses, then even the plain ones grew far apart. He passed through towns that were 1 street long and towns that were half a street, and in each of them he stopped, and he watched and he listened. And in each of them he found the same soft rot under a rougher coat. Men who cheated their neighbors, men who beat their horses. Women married for a mule and an acre. He had thought the country would be cleaner than the city. It wasn't. It was just poorer. In one town, he watched a shopkeeper short-weight an old widow's flower and dare her with his eyes to say a word. And when Ethan said the word for her, the man's whole face went to butter, and he made it right and hated Ethan for it. In another, he sat through a wedding where the bride was 14 and the groom was 50, and owned the only well, and the girl's own father counted the coin over her head, while the preacher talked about love. Ethan rode out of that town before the dancing, and was sick behind a fence, and he was a man not easily made sick. He began to wonder if his mother had sent him chasing a thing that didn't exist anywhere at all. He was 3 months gone, and near to turning back, when he heard the name. It was in a low tavern in a town called Poor Fork, and he was nursing a coffee in the corner and half asleep on his feet, when 2 men at the bar started in on a woman the way men do. "Reed girl still up on that farm alone, they say. After the winter she had, I'd not have bet a nickel she'd see spring. She saw it. Split her own wood, drove her own team, buried her own dog when the wolves got it, and never once come down the mountain to ask a man for so much as a match. My wife took a basket up in February thinking to find a corpse. Found the woman up on the roof patching shingles in the sleet." The man laughed, but it wasn't a mean laugh. "Big as she is, she near went through the roof, and still she finished the patch before she'd come down and eat. Big as she is." The other man snorted. "That's a charitable way to put it. You go up that mountain and split a cord before breakfast, Harlan. Then you can talk about how she's built. I've seen strong men, and I've seen that woman, and I know which I'd want at my back if the barn caught fire." Ethan had gone very still in his corner. "Big as she is, mean as this valley's been to her, she still took my wife's basket and sent it back full." The first man went on quieter now, filled it with the last of her own preserves and wouldn't hear a no. "My wife cried the whole way down the mountain. Said she'd never once in her life seen a person with so little give so much." "She'll lose that farm by fall all the same," Harlan said. "Sentiment don't pay a mortgage." "No, it don't." The first man drank. "But I'll tell you what. When they finally run her off it and somebody will, this valley's going to be a poorer place than it was. And it ain't the money I'm talking about." "What's her name?" Ethan said. Both men turned. They took in the cut of his coat and the quality of his boots, and went careful the way poor men go careful around money. "Whose name, mister?" "The woman on the mountain. You said Reed. Martha Reed. Matty folks call her. Why's a gentleman like you asking after Matty Reed?" The man's eyes narrowed, not unfriendly, just wary. "She ain't for sale if that's your meaning, and she'd knock your teeth down your throat for thinking it." "That's not my meaning," Ethan said. "How do I find the farm?" "You don't want to go up there tonight. Storm's coming down off the ridge. You'll not see the road." "How do I find it?" The man looked at him a long moment, then told him. "Because there's a kind of certainty in a man's voice that people answer whether they mean to or not. Up the fork road to the split oak left along the creek. Keep climbing till the trees give out and the fences start. You'll know the Reed place," the man said, "because it'll be the one still standing when everything around it's fallen down." Ethan left money on the table for a meal he hadn't eaten and went out to his horse. "Mister." The man had followed him to the door. "I'll say this once friendly. If you're going up there to make sport of that woman, or to cheat her, or to court her for whatever a man like you courts a woman like her, for you, turn around now. She's had grief enough. There's plenty round here look out for Matty Reed. I'm not going up there to do her harm," Ethan said. And then, because it was the truest thing he'd said in 3 months, "I don't rightly know why I'm going up there at all, but it isn't that." He rode into the weather. The storm caught him on the creek road, just like the man said it would, and by the time the trees gave out, he was soaked to the bone and blind past his horse's ears, and he'd have missed the farm entirely if not for the sound. Not a shout, not a bell. A steady, rhythmic crack, crack, crack cutting clean through the roar of the rain, the sound of an axe biting wood over and over without a single stroke wasted or a single one missed. He followed the sound and came up on the yard, and there she was. She was splitting wood in the downpour like it was the mildest morning God ever made. She was a big woman, broad through the shoulder and heavy through the arm and hip, and she stood a log on the block and swung and buried the axe, and the log fell in two, and she stood the next one up before the halves had finished rolling. Rain ran off her in sheets. She didn't hurry, and she didn't rest. Ethan sat his horse at the edge of the light and watched, and something moved in his chest that he had no name for, and hadn't felt in so long he'd half decided he'd lost the machinery for it. She saw him before he spoke. She sank the axe into the block and left it standing there, and turned to face him, and she didn't reach for anything, and she didn't back toward the house. She just looked at him, steady, rain on her face, and waited. "Ma'am," Ethan said, and touched his hat water, pouring off the brim. "You're lost," she said. It wasn't a question. Nobody comes up this road on purpose in weather like this. "I came up on purpose." "Then you're a fool, and being a fool's the same as being lost, only you did it to yourself." But she said it without heat. "Get down off that horse before you fall down off it. There's a lean-to on the barn'll keep him out of the wet." "I don't want to trouble you." "You're already trouble, mister. Question's just whether you'll be dry trouble or wet trouble, and I'm too tired to watch a man drown standing up." She jerked her chin toward the barn. "Go on." He got down, his legs near buckled. He'd been in the saddle since before noon, and she watched him steady himself against the horse and said nothing about it, which he was grateful for. "There's coffee inside when you've seen to him," she said, and picked her axe back up. "You're going to keep splitting in this. Wood doesn't split itself because a stranger showed up cold. Cows still need to be warm tomorrow, whether I've company or not." She stood a log up. "Go on and see to your horse. I'll be in when I'm done." "Let me help. I've got 2 hands. You've got 2 soft hands and no notion where a thing goes on this place." She swung, and the log fell in 2. "You'd slow me down, and I'd have to be polite about it, and I'm too wet to be polite. See to your horse, that you can manage." He saw to the horse. It took him longer than it should have, his hands stiff and clumsy with cold, and the whole time the axe kept up behind him. Crack, 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 unhurried, unstopping, and he found himself counting the strokes without meaning to, and lost count somewhere past 40. He had watched laborers work all his life from the far side of a window. He had never once stood close enough to hear the breath a swing takes out of a body, and it did something to him he couldn't have named. When he came into the house, she was already there, still in her wet things, feeding the stove. She'd left a towel on the table for him and a tin cup steaming beside it. "Sit," she said. "You're shaking the floor." He sat. He wrapped his hands around the cup and drank, and it was the best coffee he'd had in 3 months, which is to say it was bad coffee, but it was hot, and she'd made it and given it to a stranger with nothing asked in return. "I'm obliged to you," he said. "You're not, but it's polite of you to say so." She pulled a second chair around and lowered herself into it, and he saw for the first time the cost of the day on her, a tightness at the corners of her eyes, a slowness in how she moved once she'd stopped moving. She was tired in a way that went past the muscles. "Now, you'll tell me your name and you'll tell me your business, and if I don't like either one, you'll finish that coffee and go back the way you came, storm or no storm. I've fed strangers before, and I'll feed them again, but I don't sleep under the same roof as a name I don't know." "Ethan Calloway." She waited. "That's the name," he said. "There's not much business to tell. I'm traveling." "Traveling?" She looked at his coat where it hung dripping by the door, and his boots, and back at his face. "Men with coats like yours don't travel. They arrive. There's a difference. A traveling man's got a reason he's moving. What's yours?" He'd meant to lie. He'd had a lie ready for 3 months, a decent one, about buying land or scouting timber. It died in his mouth under her plain look. "I made my mother a promise before she died," he heard himself say. "That I'd find a certain kind of woman to marry, not for money, not for family. A woman who'd her word stand when everything falls. I've been 3 months looking, and I'd about decided she'd asked me for something that isn't real. And then a man in Poor Fork told me about a woman up a mountain who patched her own roof in an ice storm rather than come down and ask for help, and I got on my horse." The silence stretched out. Then Mattie Reed laughed. It was a real laugh from the belly, and it caught him off guard so hard he nearly spilled the coffee. "You rode up a mountain in a thunderstorm," she said, "to look at me and see if I'd make you a wife. When you say it like that, There's no other way to say it. That is what you did." She wiped her eyes, still grinning. "Mister, I've been called a lot of things in this valley. Ox, draft animal. My own aunt used to say, God gave me a workhorse's body and forgot to send the workhorse. Nobody, not once in 25 years, has come looking for me to be a wife. So you'll forgive me if I laugh, because the alternative is, I take you serious, and if I take you serious, I'll have to throw you out in the storm, and I'd feel poorly about that. Why would you have to throw me out?" Her grin faded slow. "Because men don't come up here for me, Mr. Calloway. Men come up here for the farm, or for a laugh, or to say they did. And a rich one showing up out of a storm talking about a promise." She shook her head. "I've buried my mother and my father and watched both my brothers ride west and not look back. And I've held this ground alone through 3 winters that killed stronger farms than mine, and I'll tell you what all that taught me. It taught me that when a thing's too good to be true, it's a trap. And there is nothing in this life less true than a wealthy man riding up a mountain in the rain to tell a woman like me she's worth marrying. You don't know what a woman like you is worth." "I know exactly what I'm worth," she said, sharp now. "I'm worth a strong back and 40 acres of hardpan and a debt I'm 3 seasons behind on. That's the ledger. I keep it honest because nobody else will keep it for me. So don't sit at my table and tell me my own worth, mister, because you've known me the length of 1 cup of coffee, and I've known me my whole life." He should have been stung. Instead, something in him settled the way a foot finds ground in the dark. "There it is," he said, quiet. "There what is? You just told a stranger the truth about your own debts to your own hurt, because you'd rather be honest and poor than lie and comfortable. Do you know how many people I've met in my life who'd do that?" He held up his hand and showed her his fist closed. "None. Not one. And I've met a great many people." She stared at him. For once, she didn't have an answer ready. Then she turned it back on him the way he was already learning. She turned everything back. "All right," she said. "You've had a good look at me and my ledger. Fair's fair. What's ever fallen on you, Mr. Calloway? A man with a coat like that. What do you know about everything falling?" He opened his mouth to give the easy answer, and she saw it coming and cut it off. "And don't say your mother, God rest her, because burying somebody's just being alive. Everybody does it. I mean you. What's ever tried to break you?" He was quiet a moment. "Nothing," he admitted. "You've cut right to it. Nothing ever tried. I've had every soft thing a man can have handed to him. And I woke up one morning and understood I'd never once been tested, and that I didn't know a single true thing about my own self, because a man doesn't learn what he's made of till something comes to break him, and nothing ever came for me. That's the thing I can't say out loud back home. They'd think I'd lost my mind, a rich man grieving that he's never suffered. It'd sound like complaining, all right. I know it. That's half of why I'm out here saying it to a woman who will likely throw me out by morning instead of to anybody who knows my name." He almost smiled. "You asked what fell on me. The honest answer is I rode out here to find out what I'd do if something finally did. 3 months, and I still don't know." Maddie considered him over the rim of the cup. "You'd likely surprise yourself," she said. "Most folks do, good and bad both." She set the cup down. "Now drink that before it goes cold while you sit there feeling sorry about the easy life." "There it is," he said, quiet. "There what is? You just heard a rich man say he's never suffered a day, and instead of hating me for it, you told me I might surprise myself. Most people I know would have thrown the cup." He shook his head slow. "You've got no meanness in you. None. And you've had every reason in this world to grow some." "I grew plenty," she said. "I just never grew it at strangers who hadn't done me wrong yet." She got up and busied herself at the stove with her back to him, and he had the good sense not to say anything more. He slept in the barn that night on clean straw with the horses. She'd offered it plainly, and he'd taken it plainly, and neither of them made anything of it. He lay awake a long while, listening to the rain ease off the roof, turning over the plain. Hard things she'd said to him, and he could not remember the last time a person had spoken to him as if his money were the least interesting thing about him. In the morning, the storm had blown out, and the world was washed clean and cold. And he woke to the sound of her already up, already working the clank of a bucket, and the low, easy way she talked to the cows. He came out and found her at the milking and stood at the door of the little barn and watched her hands, and after a while, she said without turning, "You can watch, or you can be useful. Watching's what men usually pick." He rolled up his sleeves and asked her what wanted doing. "You sure about that?" She looked at the fine shirt, the soft, unmarked hands. "Those hands have never done a day. I can tell from here. You'll blister before noon and you'll cry about it." "Then I'll blister. Suit yourself." She almost smiled. "But you'll not cry about it in my barn. A man cries in my barn, he cries walking down the road." She gave him the meanest, filthiest job on the place, mucking the stalls to see if he'd balk. He didn't. He'd never done it in his life, and he did it badly, and he did it without complaint, and he caught her watching him once sideways with something in her face that wasn't quite trust, but had shaken hands with it. "You're doing it wrong," she said, watching. "I know. You're not asking me how to do it right. I figured a man ought to earn the right to be taught." He kept working. "You'll tell me when you decide I've earned it." She looked at him a moment. Then she came over and showed him hands over the fork, how to turn it so the work went easier, and she didn't make a thing of it, and neither did he. They worked the morning through. She didn't chatter, and neither did he, and he found the quiet between them was a comfortable kind, the kind that doesn't need filling. Near noon, she straightened up from a fence post she'd been resetting and pressed a hand to the small of her back, and he saw the flicker of pain cross her face before she smoothed it away. "You work like you're paying off a sentence," he said. "I'm working like a woman with more to do than hours to do it in, same as every day. You could hire help." "With what I told you the ledger. I could—" "Don't." She said it flat and fast and pointed the fence rail at him like a bar across a door. "Don't you finish that. The one thing I've got left that's mine is that I've never took $1 off a man I didn't earn. You start handing me money and I'm just what this whole valley's always said. I am a big dumb girl waiting for some man to fix her life. I'd sooner lose the farm." "You might lose it anyway." Her jaw tightened. "Then I'll lose it standing up and owing nobody. That's mine to choose." He let it go. He was learning fast that she meant every word she said and would hold to it past all sense. And the strange thing was that instead of frustrating him, it moved him, because he had spent his whole life among people whose word was worth exactly as much as the moment they said it in. And here was a woman ready to lose the ground under her feet before she'd bend to principle. She fed him at noon, cornbread and beans and a slab of bacon, and she set it down in front of him without ceremony, and sat across the table and ate her own with the appetite of a person who'd earned it. "You're staring," she said, not looking up. "I'm not." "You are. You're doing the thing men do, where they watch a big woman eat like it's a show at a fair." She met his eyes level. "Go on and get it out of your system so we can move past it. I was thinking," Ethan said carefully, "that you're the first person I've eaten across from in 5 years who wasn't performing something. My aunt eats like she's being painted. You eat like food's for living on." Maddie's fork paused. She hadn't expected that either. "Well," she said, "that's a new one." She went back to eating, but something in her had eased a notch. "You want to know about the brothers. I can see you circling it. Go on and ask." "You said they went west." "They went west because they could, and because staying meant working like I work, and they were men, so nobody in the valley thought less of them for choosing easy." She said it without bitterness, which was somehow worse than bitterness. "Caleb and Tom. Good boys mostly. When Daddy got sick, they told me they'd send money once they got settled. That was 3 years ago. First year they sent a letter. Second year nothing. I stopped looking for the mail." She wiped bread through the beans. "I don't hold it against them. A man's supposed to go make his fortune. A woman's supposed to stay and mind the graves. That's the law of the valley, and I'm the last one home to mind these graves, so here I am. And nobody helped you." "People helped, some. Old Pruitt lent me his mule the spring mine died. The Hendersons send a boy up at branding." She looked at him. "But help and want are two different things, Mr. Calloway. Folks'll help me. Not a one of them wants me. There's a difference, and I learned it young. When I was 17, there was a barn dance, and I put on my mother's blue dress, and I walked the whole 3 miles down, and I stood against the wall the entire night, and not one man asked me, and near the end, I heard 2 of them arguing over who'd have to. She said it plainly. A fact reported no crack in her voice. I walked the 3 miles home in the dark, and I burned the dress in the stove, and I never went to another dance. That's when I learned my worth. Right there against that wall. So you'll understand why I laughed last night. Ethan had set down his fork. Those men were fools, he said. They were ordinary. That's worse than fools. Fools you can forgive. She stood, gathered the plates. I'm not telling you for pity. I don't want your pity, and I'll throw you out if you offer it. I'm telling you so you'll quit looking at me like I'm a mystery you rode up a mountain to solve. There's no mystery. I'm a woman the world took a good long look at and decided wasn't wanted, and I decided to go on and be worth something anyway to myself since nobody else would price me fair. That's the whole of it. Now come reset that far fence before we lose the light. He got up and followed her out, and he thought walking behind her broad, steady shoulders across the yard that he had met dukes and senators and men who owned rivers, and not one of them had ever said a thing to him as brave as what that woman had just said, clearing beans off a table. They were coming back up from the lower field when the rider came. He came hard up the creek road, a young man on a lathered horse, and he was calling her name before he'd cleared the trees. Maddie Reed. That's Eli. She was already moving faster than a woman her size ought to move, and Ethan went with her. Eli Turner works the mill down the valley. He doesn't ride like that for nothing. The young man hauled his horse up in the yard and near fell out of the saddle. He was maybe 20 mill dust still in his hair, and his face was white. Maddie, thank God. I thought I'd not beat them up. He gulped air. You have to listen. There's men coming. Hale's men. This afternoon, maybe sooner. They've got paper on you. Paper? Maddie went still. What paper? I'm behind on the mortgage, but I've got till the fall term. It's in the county book. I've seen it myself. Not the mortgage. Eli got the words out in a rush. A debt. An old debt, they're saying, from your daddy. Signed and witnessed and everything showing your daddy borrowed against the whole farm from Victor Hale's company 8 years back and never paid a cent, and now it's called due, all of it today. And if you can't pay it... He stopped, his throat working. They mean to take the place. Legal. Sheriff's coming with them to make it legal. This afternoon. My father never borrowed $1 from Victor Hale in his life. Maddie's voice had gone quiet and terrible. My father would have sooner shook hands with the devil. I know his ledgers. I've kept them since he died. There is no such debt. They've got the paper, Maddie. I saw a copy myself down at the mill office where they posted the notice. It's got his name on it. It's got his mark. Then it's a lie and a forgery, and I'll say so to the sheriff's face. They don't care if it's a lie. Eli's voice cracked. That's what I wrote up to tell you. It's not just you. It's the Hendersons and Old Man Pruitt and the Cobb place. Half the valley's got these debts turning up out of nowhere all at once. All of them to Hale, all of them called due, and every single farm it's happening to is one Hale's been trying to buy for 2 years and couldn't. He's not buying anymore. He's taking. And the law's helping him do it. The sheriff, Maddie said. Coombs has known me since I was a girl in pigtails. Coombs owes Hale $900. Everybody knows it. A man that deep in it does what he's told. Eli scrubbed a hand down his face. Maddie, I'm not saying give up. I rode near to killing this horse to get here ahead of them. I'm saying you've got no papers to fight with, and they've got a sheriff, and I don't see how... Then don't see, Maddie said. Get down off worrying and think. But her hands had curled into fists at her sides, and Ethan saw for the first time something in her face that hadn't been there through the whole storm or the whole hard morning fear. Not for herself, for the ground. This farm is the only thing my family's got left in this world that says we were ever here. My mother's under the foundation of that house. My father dug his grave with his own hands beside her and made me promise I'd keep them company. If Hale takes this ground, he takes them, he plows them under for whatever's down there, and there won't be a stone left to say a reed ever drew breath in this valley." Her voice shook and steadied. "I'll die before that. I mean it plain. I'll die on this porch first." "Nobody's dying," Ethan said. The yard went quiet, except for the blowing of the tired horse. Ethan spoke for the first time since the boy had ridden in. "Victor Hale," he said. "The railroad man." Both of them turned and looked at him like they'd forgotten he was there. "You know him," Maddie said. "I know of him. I know what he is." Ethan's jaw had set hard. "I've sat across tables from 3 men like Victor Hale in my life, and I know how they work. They don't do a thing this bold, this crooked, this all at once unless the prize is enormous. A man in his position risks prison to forge a debt. He does not risk prison for 40 acres of hardpan and a widow's cornfield." He looked at Maddie and his voice dropped. "The question you want to ask isn't why he's coming for you. It's what's under your land that's worth a railroad breaking the law to reach." Maddie stared at him. "Under my—" She stopped. Something crossed her face, a memory surfacing whole. "My father. The last year before the fever took him. He got strange about the low field. Wouldn't let the boys plow past the creek bend. Spent a week down there with a lantern doing God knows what, and when I asked, he'd only say—" Her voice caught. He'd say, "It's not ours to lose yet, Maddie. Not till I've made it safe." I thought he'd gone soft in the head. I thought the fever was already in him. Her hand came up to her mouth. "And at the end he wasn't making sense by then, he kept mixing up the years. But he kept saying one thing over and over. 'It's in the safe place, girl, where your mother is.' I thought he meant heaven. I thought he was telling me he'd see her soon." "Where's your mother buried?" Ethan asked. Maddie was already turning toward the house. "There's a stone in the root cellar, under the far shelf. Mama wanted to be laid to rest here, and Daddy walled a little space for her ashes into the foundation so she'd always be under the house she built." Her breath had gone ragged. "Where your mother is. He didn't mean heaven, he meant the cellar." "Then we've got maybe 2 hours," Ethan said, "to find what your father died protecting before Victor Hale's men come to steal it." "Eli, how many men?" "6 that I saw, and the sheriff." "Armed?" "They're always armed. It's Hale's men." "And how many men in this valley owe Hale nothing and hate him plenty?" Eli blinked. "Most of them. Near all. But mister, they're scared. Every family in reach of him is scared. You don't ride out and knock on a man's door and tell him to grab his gun and go stand against Victor Hale. He'll shut the door in your face, and thank God it wasn't his farm this week. He'll shut the door if you ask him to be a hero," Ethan said. "You're not going to ask him that. You're going to tell him the truth that the same paper coming for Maddie Reed today is coming for him by fall, and that for once there's proof, and for once there's a chance to break it, but only if the whole valley stands at once. A scared man alone stays home. A scared man who learns his neighbor's standing too will find his boots." He fixed the boy with a hard look. "Can you carry that fast into every door?" Eli sat up straighter in the saddle. Something in the boy's white face firmed. "I can carry it." "Then before you rest that horse you ride, every last door." Ethan was already moving toward the house, and Maddie was moving with him, and something had changed in the set of both their shoulders. "Maddie, show me the cellar. If your father was half the man his daughter turned out to be, he didn't just hide it. He left proof, and he left it where a Reed would think to look and a Hale never would." She stopped in the doorway and looked back at him. This stranger who'd ridden up out of a storm the night before, talking about a dead woman's promise, and now stood in her yard ready to fight a railroad. "Why?" she said. "You've known me one day. This isn't your fight. You could ride down that mountain right now, and nobody in the world would say a word against you. So why?" And Ethan Calloway, who had spent 5 years unable to answer his aunt, unable to answer Dorsey, unable to answer the men at the supper table, found that this answer came to him easy and whole and true. "Because my mother told me to find a woman who'd stand when everything falls," he said. "And everything's about to fall on you this afternoon. and I've never in my life been so sure of anything as I am that you're going to stand." He held the door. "I'd just as soon stand next to you when you do." Maddie Reed looked at him a moment longer. Then she wiped her face with the back of a big work-hardened hand and squared those broad shoulders that a whole valley had spent her whole life calling ugly. And she went down into the dark of the cellar to dig up what her father had died to keep with a rich stranger at her back and 2 hours on the clock. The cellar steps were rotten, and she took them fast anyway, and Ethan came down behind her with a lantern he'd grabbed off the wall, and the dark closed over both of them cold and close. "Far shelf," she said. "Help me move it." They put their shoulders to it together. The shelf was oak and heavy and packed with jars, and Maddie didn't stop to clear one of them, just heaved, and the jars slid and smashed on the floor, and neither of them looked down. There. She was on her knees in the wet, running her hands along the foundation stones. "There's a mortar line here that never set right. Daddy pointed it once and told me never to mind it. Never to mind it." Her voice broke on the second time. "He wasn't losing his head. He was telling me. He was telling me, and I thought he was dying stupid." "Maddie, I called it in my own mind. I thought my daddy's dying stupid. God take him quick." She dug her fingers into the mortar line, and it crumbled soft, too soft, packed loose on purpose. "He was smarter dying than the whole valley's been alive." "Get the edge. Both hands." The stone came free. Behind it was a hollow the size of a bread box, and in the hollow sat a wooden case wrapped in oilcloth, and beside the case, pressed into the dirt, where the ashes were a second small stone rounded river. Smooth, the kind a man picks up because his wife liked it. Maddie put her hand flat against that stone and held it there a second before she took the case. "All right, Mama," she whispered. "All right." Then she came up off her knees with the case against her chest, and Ethan lifted the lantern, and they got the oilcloth off it, right there on the cellar floor. No time, no patience. Her fingers, and his fingers both. Inside were papers. A stack of them tied in string, and a leather journal gone dark at the corners, and Maddie pulled the top sheet loose and turned it to the light and read it and went dead white. "What?" Ethan said. "What is it?" "It's a receipt." Her voice had gone strange. "A receipt from Hale's own company, made out to a man named Deacons. Paying him, it says right here, paying him $40 to swear before a notary that he witnessed my father sign a note he never signed." She looked up. "They kept a receipt. They paid a man to lie, and they wrote it down, and they kept it in their books, and somehow my father got a copy of it, and he hid it under my mother." "How would your father get their books?" "I don't know. I don't—" She was already pulling the next sheet. "This one's the same. A different name. Cobb. Paid $30 to swear he saw old man Cobb take a loan, and this one Henderson 25. Her hands were shaking now, and she didn't try to hide it. "It's all of them, Ethan. Every family Eli named, every single one. My father had proof they were forging the whole valley 2 years before they came for me." 2 years? Ethan took the sheet from her and held it to the light. 2 years he sat on this. "You understand what that means. Your father could have taken these to a newspaper, to a marshal in the capital, a real one past Hale's reach. 2 years, and he didn't. Why wouldn't he?" Her voice climbed. "Why would a man find proof like this and sit on it and let it eat him and die with it walled up under his own house? Why? Because he was one man against a railroad and he knew it." Ethan's jaw tightened. A lone farmer walks into the Capitol waving papers about a coal seam worth millions, and Victor Hale hears about it by supper, and that farmer has an accident on the road home. Your father wasn't hiding these because he was a coward, Maddie. He was hiding them because he'd done the math the same as I did in that yard. One man's proof is a dead man's proof. It only becomes a weapon when there's enough people behind it that killing them all is worse than losing. He set the sheet down slow. He was waiting for a crowd. He died before one came. And tonight, God help us, one's coming up your ridge with lanterns. Your father built this weapon and never got to fire it. You're going to fire it for him. Maddie stood there with her dead father's proof in her 2 hands, and the truth of him landing on her all at once, 4 years of his silence, turning inside out into 4 years of his love, and for a second she couldn't hold the weight of it. Then she pulled the next sheet. Ethan took the journal. He opened it in the middle and read fast, his jaw working. "This is worse," he said. "How is it worse?" "Because it's not just false debts." He turned the journal so she could see, though the light was bad, and neither of them could read it well. "These are survey notes. Mineral survey. Your father found where the seam runs. He must have hired a man himself, a real assayer, and paid him quiet, and it's mapped here, page after page. There's coal under this valley, Maddie, under your low field, and half the county besides. A seam that runs for miles." He looked up at her. "That's what Hale wants, not farms. He wants to own the ground so he can gut it, and he needs it cheap, and the cheapest way to buy a man's land is to prove he already owes you every acre. My father knew." She sat back on her heels in the wreckage of the jars. "My father knew all of it, and he never told me. He let me think he'd gone soft. He let me bury him, thinking his mind had gone because—" She stopped. Somewhere above them, a board creaked, and they both froze, and Maddie's hand shot to Ethan's wrist and gripped it hard enough to hurt. They waited. The creak did not come again, just the house settling or the wind. "Not yet," Ethan breathed. "Not them yet. Keep moving. Because if you'd known you'd have fought," he went on low. "And if you'd fought before he was ready, they'd have killed you for it and taken this anyway. He kept you ignorant to keep you alive. He was buying you time to be strong enough." "That's the cruelest kind of love there is," she said. "It's the only kind he had left to give." She turned another page of the journal, and her breath stopped. "Ethan?" Her voice had gone thin. "There's a name in here I know. In my father's own hand. He wrote, if they come it will not be Hale who does it. It will be his man. Watch the quiet one. Watch Deacons." She looked up. "Deacons is the name on the first receipt. The witness Hale paid $40 to lie. My father knew the man's name. My father was afraid of one particular man enough to write it down and warn me from the grave, and I've never in my life heard that name till today." "Then you'll remember it now," Ethan said. "If a quiet one turns up in that yard tonight and everybody else is loud, that's the one you don't turn your back on. There's more." She was reading fast, her lips moving. "He kept a running list. Dates. Every time a Hale man came sniffing round the low field, my father wrote it down. 4 years of it. 4 years he watched them circle this ground and said not one word to me, and smiled at his supper and told me to mind the fence and never mind the mortar." Her voice cracked clean through. "I thought he stopped talking to me because the fever took his sense. He stopped talking to me to protect me. And I was angry at a dying man for going quiet." She pressed the journal to her chest. "God forgive me. I was angry at him." "He'd forgive you in a heartbeat," Ethan said. "You held his ground alone for 3 years. That's a daughter's answer to a father's silence, and it's the right one, and he'd know it. Now put it away. We can grieve when the ground's still ours." She wiped her face hard with the back of her wrist and got up. "How long?" "Since Eli rode in better part of an hour, which means—" They both heard it at the same time. Above them through the cellar hatch, the sound of horses. More than one. A lot more than one. Maddie went still. "That's not Eli," she said. "No. That's them." "Yes?" Ethan wrapped the papers back in the oilcloth fast and pushed the whole bundle into her hands. "Listen to me. Whatever's about to happen up there, you do not let them see this. Not the case. Not one page. You hide it on your body, and you keep it hid, because the second Victor Hale knows this exists, he stops trying to be legal, and he starts trying to be quick. Do you understand me?" "I understand." She shoved the bundle down the front of her dress, and her whole face changed, the fear folding away under something harder. "Ethan." "What? You came down here a rich man looking for a wife to prove your mother right." She met his eyes in the lantern light. "You're about to go up those stairs into 6 armed men over a fight that isn't yours. This is the last second you get to walk out the back and down the mountain and nobody blames you. So I'm asking one more time, and then I'll never ask again. Why? And Ethan Calloway, who 3 months ago could not have said what a single thing in his life was for, put his hand flat against the small of her back over where the papers hid, and he said, "Because I finally found the one my mother sent me for. And I'll be damned before I let Victor Hale take her ground while I stand and watch." Then he blew out the lantern. "Now go up smiling. Make them think you're beaten. It buys us minutes." They came up out of the cellar into a yard full of men. 6 riders, just like Eli said, hard men on good horses, and out front of them on a gray gelding sat a man in a black coat too fine for the country, and beside him, hangdog, and would not meet Maddie's eye, sat Sheriff Coombs, with his star pinned crooked like he'd dressed in a hurry to do a thing he hated. "Miss Reed," the man in the black coat said. He had a pleasant voice. That was the worst of it, Ethan thought, the pleasantness. "Victor Hale, I don't believe we've had the honor." "I know who you are." "Then you know why I'm here, and we can spare each other the ugliness of me explaining it." Hale drew a folded paper from his coat with 2 fingers, unhurried a man who had all the time in the world because he'd already decided how the afternoon would end. "You're behind on a debt your late father contracted with my company. Principal and interest called due. Sheriff Coombs is here to see the transfer done lawful and peaceable. I'd like it peaceable, Miss Reed. I truly would. My father never borrowed a cent from you. The note says otherwise. The note is witnessed." Hale's pleasant face never moved. "You can dispute it in the county court, of course. That's your right. Of course, the county court sits in November, and the seizure is today, so you'd be disputing it from the road. But the right is yours all the same. This is America." One of his men laughed. Coombs looked at his own hands. "Sheriff." Maddie turned to him, and her voice came out steady, and Ethan marveled at it. "Bill Coombs, you carried my daddy's coffin. You ate at that table right there more Sundays than I can count. You going to stand on your horse and watch this man throw me off the ground you helped put my father in?" Coombs' jaw worked. "Maddie, look at me when you do it. That's all I ask. You look at me." "Maddie, I got no choice." It came out of him low and miserable. "The paper's legal. My hands are tied. You think I want—" He stopped himself and glanced at Hale and shut his mouth, and in that one guilty glance, Ethan read the whole $900. "His hands aren't tied," Ethan said, stepping forward off the porch. "They're bought. There's a difference, though. I'll grant you it looks the same from a horse." Every head turned to him. Hale's pleasant eyes moved over the coat, the boots, the bearing, and for the first time, something flickered behind them. A merchant recognizing another merchant. A predator smelling a thing it hadn't accounted for. "And you are?" "A traveler," Ethan said. "Passing through. Enjoying the local hospitality." "A traveler." Hale smiled thin. "You've the look of a city man to me. The coat's from back east. New York, I'd guess, or near it. You've a good eye. I've an excellent eye. It's how I know that a New York coat does not wander 3 months into the back country to split a poor woman's firewood." Hale leaned forward slightly on the pommel. "So I'll ask you plainly, city man, because I'm a busy person, and this valley is full of things I've paid for and things I mean to. What is your interest in Martha Reed?" And Ethan understood in that half-second the shape of the trap. If he said nothing, Hale would take him for a hired gun, and this would end in shooting. If he said too much, Hale would know there was something here worth killing for. So he told the exact truth, which is the last thing a liar ever expects. "I came to court her," Ethan said. The yard went silent. Then Hale's man laughed again, uglier this time, and 2 others joined him, and even Coombs looked up startled. "To court her?" Hale's mouth curved. "This one. That one. City man, I've had a long day, don't make sport of me. I'm not the one making sport." Ethan's voice dropped and went cold, and every laugh in the yard died on it. "Every man here just laughed at her. You laughed loudest, and I'll tell you what I see standing on this porch. I see a woman who held 40 acres alone through 3 winters that would have killed any man you brought up this mountain. I see the only honest ledger in this whole rotten county. And I see 6 of you and a bought sheriff needing forged paper and a small army to steal it from her because not one of you has the sand to take it face to face." He came down another step. "So laugh again, gentlemen. Go on. I want to see which of you thinks it's funny with me looking at you." Nobody laughed. Hale studied him a long moment, and the pleasantness had gone out of his face entirely now, and what was left underneath was patient and reptile cold. "You're not a hired gun," Hale said slowly. "A gun would have drawn by now. You're something worse. You're a man with money and a conscience, which is the most expensive thing in the world and the most useless." He straightened. "It changes nothing. Sheriff served the paper." But before Coombs could move, Hale lifted one gloved finger, a small gesture, and one of his riders swung down off his horse. "On second thought," Hale's eyes had not left Ethan's face. "Deacons, go through the house." Ethan felt the papers against Maddie's ribs like they'd caught fire. He kept his face empty. The man who swung down was lean and gray, and said nothing, and Maddie went rigid beside Ethan, because she knew the name. Now she'd read it, not 20 minutes ago, in her dead father's hand. "Watch the quiet one. Watch Deacons." The quiet one was walking toward her door. "There's nothing in my house of yours," Maddie said. "Then you'll not mind the looking." Hale smiled. "A man in my position, Miss Reed, likes to know a property before he owns it. Deacons is thorough. It's his great virtue." Deacons put a boot on the bottom porch step, and Ethan, who had never bluffed a man's life in his soft, rich years, heard his own voice come out level and bored. "You'll want to send more than one Mr. Hale." Deacons stopped. Hale's eyes flicked. "And why is that?" "Because your man's about to walk into a house he doesn't know, in a county he doesn't know, on the word of paper half these people already suspect is forged." Ethan shrugged easy, a man discussing weather. "And if one of those neighbors watching from the tree line decides a lone stranger going through Maddie Reed's mother's things is one insult past bearing, your thorough man comes out of that house feet first, and then you've got a killing on your hands. You didn't plan in front of a sheriff over corn." He tipped his head at the ridgeline at nothing at the dark. "You're a careful man. You said so yourself. Is one quick look through a widow's Bible worth what it costs you if it goes wrong?" It was pure bluff. There was no one in the tree line. Not yet. But Hale had built an empire on knowing exactly how much a thing was worth. And he weighed it now. Behind that cold, pleasant face, one quiet man against a rumor of watching neighbors. And he found the math not to his liking. "Deacons." A pause. "Later, when it's ours and empty." The gray man stepped back off the porch without a word, and Ethan let out no breath, though every muscle in him wanted to. "You've a quick-tongued city man. I'll remember it. Sheriff served the paper. Wait." Maddie stepped up beside Ethan. "You want peaceable. You said so. I heard you." She had her chin up. "I'll go peaceable. I'll walk off my own land without a fight, and you won't have to spend a bullet or a headline on it. On one condition." Hale tilted his head. "I don't generally take conditions, Miss Reed. You'll take this one because it costs you nothing, and it saves you trouble. Give me till sundown. Let me pack my mother's things and my father's Bible and walk off this ground on my own feet with what dignity I got left instead of being dragged. Sundown. Then it's yours free and clear, and I'll sign whatever you put in front of me and never darken your county court." She spread her empty hands. "Or you can drag a fat farm woman off her land in front of your own men and the sheriff, and you can wonder for the rest of your life which of them tells the story in a saloon and how it grows in the telling. Your choice, Mr. Hale. You're the busy man." Ethan kept his face still, but inside something in him sang because he saw what she was doing. She was buying the afternoon. She was buying the exact hours Eli needed to ride the valley. Hale saw a woman folding. He saw a beaten thing asking for a scrap of pride, and men like Hale had learned long ago that granting the scrap was cheaper than denying it. "Sundown," he said. "You're a sensible woman after all, Miss Reed, whatever else you are." He gathered his reins. I'll leave 2 men, for your protection, and to be certain sundown doesn't stretch." He nodded at the 2 nearest hard cases both, and turned his gray toward the road. "Coombs, with me. We've the Pruitt place before dark." They rode out most of them, and the 2 he'd left swung down and made themselves comfortable against the corral rail with their rifles across their knees, close enough to watch the house, close enough to hear a shout. Maddie went inside. Ethan went with her, and the second the door was shut, she sagged against it, all the steel going out of her at once, and pressed both hands over her mouth. "I lied to Victor Hale's face," she whispered. "I lied to his face, and he bought it. You didn't lie. You said you'd walk off peaceable by sundown. You never said the valley wouldn't walk on at the same time." Ethan crossed to the window and looked at the 2 men at the rail. "You bought Eli his hours. That was the finest thing I've watched a person do in 20 years. He nearly sent that man into my house." Her hands were shaking now that there was no one to see it but him. "Deacons. He nearly walked into my mother's room with these against my ribs, and you stopped it with nothing with air with a lie about people in the trees who aren't there." She looked at him. "How'd you do that? How'd you stand in front of that man and lie that smooth with your heart, going like mine's going now? Because I learned one thing in 5 years of rich men's rooms." Ethan didn't turn from the window. A man like Hale can smell fear, and he can smell a lie, but he cannot smell a lie told by a man who doesn't care whether it's believed. So I stopped caring. I decided in that half second that it didn't matter if he believed me, because either way, I was going to stand on your porch, and once a man stops needing to be believed, he gets very hard to read. He finally turned. "But hear me, Maddie. It bought us this afternoon. It didn't buy us deacons. That man's coming back when it's dark, and it's ours, and it's empty." Those were Hale's own words, and that man read something in your face out there. He's quiet, but he's not blind. If it comes to a search tonight, we don't get to bluff him twice. Then we don't let it come to a search. She pushed off the door steel, coming back into her by inches. What do we do till dark? We wait. We look beaten. And we get you ready to hide these somewhere better than your dress. Because if this night goes the way I think, there's going to be a moment, men put hands on both of us, and I'd not have Victor Hale's coal survey fall out on the ground at his feet. He looked at the 2 men out the window. It won't hold. He left men. If Eli comes back with a crowd and those 2 see it, then we deal with those 2 before Eli comes. Ethan turned from the window. "How many guns in the house?" "My daddy's shotgun. 1 box of shells, maybe half full. That's it. That's enough if it doesn't come to using it." He was thinking fast now, and she watched him do it, and she'd never in her life seen a man think like that, like a river finding its way around stone. "Those 2 are bored already. Bored men get careless. When it turns dark, one of them's going to want coffee or a warm place, or he's going to have to go behind the barn, and the second they split up—" "Ethan." She'd gone to the window herself. "There's a 3rd one." "What?" "Coming up the creek road, alone, on foot." She squinted. "That's not Hale's. That walks like—" Her whole body changed. "That's Eli. That's Eli coming back, and he's coming right up the open road into 2 rifles, and he can't see them from there. The barn's between him and—" She was already moving for the door. "They'll shoot him for a trespasser. I have to warn him. You go out that door, and they know something's wrong." Ethan caught her arm. "Let me." "They'll shoot you. They'll shoot a farm woman running and shouting. They'll only talk to a city man walking slow with his hands where they can see them." He was already opening the door. "Keep the shotgun by the window and your eyes on my back. If it goes bad, you'll know." He walked out into the yard with his hands loose and open at his sides, ambling a bored man come out to stretch his legs, and the 2 at the rail came up off it with their rifles half lifted. "Far enough, city man. Easy friend." Ethan stopped easy smiling. "Just stretching. A man can't sit a house all afternoon." He tipped his head toward the barn, toward the road beyond it. Eli was walking up. "Long as I'm up. That well behind the barn, still good, or's it gone brackish? I've a powerful thirst, and the lady's coffee's likely why." The nearer man snorted despite himself. How would we know? We ain't from here. No, no, you're not. Ethan kept walking slow, angling, putting his own body between the two rifles and the mouth of the creek road so that when Eli came around the barn, the men would have to shoot through Ethan to reach him. Where's Hale keep you boys between jobs? Not around here, I'd wager. There's not a bed in this county fit for a man does the work you do. Town, the second man said, warming the way a bored man warms to any voice. Over to Hallie's Crossing. He keeps rooms. Hallie's Crossing. Ethan whistled low. That's a long ride to steal a widow's corn. Man must pay well. Man pays fine. The nearer one's rifle had drifted down an inch. When he's minded to, when it goes clean. He spat. This one's took too long. Should have been done by noon. I don't like a job that runs to dark. No, Ethan said. A job that runs to dark's a job that's gone wrong somewhere. Any man knows that. And that was when Eli came around the corner of the barn 20 feet away, whistling head down, and looked up and saw two of Hale's men, and froze white as a sheet. Everything hung. The nearer man's rifle came up again fast, and his voice went hard. Who's that? Who the hell is that? Ethan did not turn around. He kept his eyes on the two men, and his voice bored, and his boots exactly where they were between the rifles and the boy. Eli, he said loud and easy before the rifle could settle. There you are. The lady's been asking after that mill order. You bring the flour or not? Eli's mouth opened. Nothing came out. The rifle stayed up. The flour boy. Ethan's eyes bored into him, and every word carried a second word underneath it. For the biscuits. You said you'd bring it up from the mill this afternoon. Did you bring it, or did you forget your own head again? Something clicked behind Eli's eyes, some understanding of the game. Yes, I left it at the bottom of the road, the sack split. I was coming to fetch a hand to carry it. Course you did. Ethan turned to the two men, rueful one working man to another, about a fool boy, and the very ordinariness of him took the tension out of the air like a slow leak. Mill hands. You spend $1 on the flour and lose it to a torn sack. That the mill boy Hales got running his messages. He added careless, and the nearer man grunted. That's him, simple as a post. Been up and down that road twice today. Looks it. Ethan agreed. Go on. Eli, go tell Miss Reed you split her flour again, she'll skin you. He jerked his head at the house. Go on. Eli went fast, keeping Ethan's body between himself and the guns the whole way, and the two men watched him go, and lost interest by degrees, because a fool mill boy with a torn flour sack was the least interesting thing in a boring afternoon, and that was exactly what Ethan had made him. The rifles came down. The nearer man leaned back on the rail. Ethan yawned, stretched, wandered back toward the house like a man with nowhere to be, and only when the door was shut behind him did his hands begin at last to shake. Inside, Eli was shaking. How'd you? I near died. I come up that road and there they were, and I thought, talk quiet. Ethan shut the door. What did you get? How many? They're coming. Eli's voice dropped to a rush. God, Maddie, they're all coming. I hit every door like the man said. Henderson's, Pruitt's, the Cobbs, the whole Dutch settlement past the creek. I told them like you told me, the same paper's coming for all of them, and there's proof, and it's tonight or it's never. He swallowed. Some slammed the door, but more than half didn't. More than half went for their coats before I finished talking. There's men gathering at the mill right now, 20 at least, maybe 30 by dark. They're waiting on one thing. What thing? Maddie said. Eli looked at her, then at Ethan. Word, he said. That it's real. That the proof's real, and there's a plan, and it ain't just a fat girl and a stranger dying alone on a mountain so the rest of them can get shot for nothing. They want to know there's a plan before they bring their families into range of Hale's guns. He spread his hands. Is there a plan? Because I told them there was, and I don't rightly know if I lied. The room went quiet. Maddie looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at the two men out the window and the box of shells and the shotgun and the papers hidden against Maddie's ribs and the last light already leaning gold across the yard. There's a plan, Ethan said. There is, Maddie said. There is now. He turned from the window. Hale left 2 men and rode to the Pruitt place, thinking he'd be back at sundown to a beaten woman signing paper. He does not know the valley's arming. He does not know these papers exist. Right now, this second, we know 3 things he doesn't. And in a fight, gentlemen knowing what the other man doesn't is the whole of it. He crossed to the table. Eli, you'll go back down to the mill and you'll carry these words exact. The proof is real. I've held it in my 2 hands. It names every family Hale forged, and it maps a coal seam under this whole valley worth more than every man there will make in 10 lifetimes. That's why he's stealing them out. Not for corn, for coal. You tell them that, and watch what it does to a man to learn. The thing he's about to lose is worth a fortune he never knew he was sitting on. Eli's eyes had gone wide. Coal. Coal. Now here's this plan, and you carry it word for word. Ethan set both hands flat on the table. They do not come up this mountain in a mob. A mob gets shot, and Hale gets his headline about lawless farmers and calls in real law from the Capitol, and then he wins. They come quiet. They come after full dark. They come with lanterns and with whatever guns they own, and they do not fire a single shot unless Hale's men fire first. Because the second, we're the ones who shot first, we're outlaws, and the second, he's the one who shot first in front of 30 witnesses, he's a murderer. You understand the difference? Everything turns on it. Lanterns and no shooting. Eli was nodding fast. Come quiet, ring the farm, and let him be the one to draw first in front of everybody. In front of everybody. That's the whole plan. Numbers and witnesses. He can murder 1 woman in the dark. He cannot murder 30 families holding lanterns while the sheriff watches, because even a bought sheriff won't hang for a thing like that, and Hale knows it. And if he don't care... Eli's voice climbed. You keep saying he won't shoot 30 people. What if he's the kind that would? What if he's got more men than we know, waiting down the road, and he wants the killing, wants it big and bloody, so nobody in this valley ever raises a hand to him again for 100 years? The boy was breathing hard. You're asking me to go tell fathers to bring their sons and their wives up a mountain into Hale's guns on your word, mister. And I met you yesterday, and if you're wrong, they die, and it's on me for carrying it. The room went dead quiet. Maddie looked at Ethan and did not defend him. She let the question sit because it was the right question, and she wanted to see how he answered it. Ethan met the boy's eyes straight. You're right to be afraid, Eli. And you're right that it's on you, and I won't lie and tell you it isn't. He came around the table slow. But hear me. Hale is not a man who wants killing. Killing is loud, and killing brings the capital, and killing costs money to make quiet after. Hale wants this to look legal. That's the whole reason for the forged paper, and the bought sheriff, a man who was willing to just murder his way to that coal, would have done it 2 years ago and saved himself the forgery. He is spending fortunes to keep it clean, which means the one thing in the world he cannot afford is 30 witnesses watching him draw first. He put a hand on the boy's shoulder. The lanterns aren't for us to see by. The lanterns are so every farmer holding one is a candle. Hale can't blow out without the whole state smelling smoke. Do you understand? The light is the weapon, not the guns, the light. Eli stared at him. Something in the boy's chest steadied. The light is the weapon, he repeated. One more thing, and it's the one that holds it all together. Ethan straightened. When they come, one man carries a message ahead to Sheriff Coombs, wherever Hale's dragged him. And the message is this: the proof of the forgery is real, it's in safe hands, and copies are already made and given to men Hale can't reach. He looked at Eli. They're not made. Not yet. There's no time and no one to give them to. But Coombs doesn't know that. And a bought man who suddenly learns his crime is written down somewhere beyond his reach. That man starts thinking real hard about which side he wants to be standing on when the sun comes up. Maddie was staring at him. You'd turn the sheriff. I'd give the sheriff a reason to turn himself. It's cheaper and it holds better. A man like Coombs didn't go bad because he's wicked. He went bad because he owed $900 and Hale owned the note. Show that man a door out that doesn't end in prison and watch how fast he walks through it. Ethan looked at the window at the failing light. Eli, go. Down the back of the ridge, not the road. Those two can't see the back of the ridge. Fast as your legs go. Full dark lanterns, no shooting the word about the coal and the word to Coombs. Say it back to me. Eli said it back, all of it twice. His voice steadier each time, and then he was out the back window and gone down the ridge like a deer. And the two men at the corral rail never saw a thing but a fat farm woman's shadow moving behind her curtains and a bored city man yawning at her table. Then it was just the two of them again, and the light going, and the two rifles waiting in the yard. Ethan? Maddie sat down slow across from him. Can I ask you something, and will you tell me true? I've told you nothing but true since I walked in your door. That plan. She folded her hands on the table. The copies that aren't made. The sheriff you're going to scare into turning. The valley you're bringing up my mountain to stand in front of Hale's guns on a bluff. All of it turning on him, drawing first and 30 families being brave enough not to run. Her eyes searched his face. Have you ever done anything like this before? Have you ever once in your soft, rich life put people's lives on a bluff and had it hold? Ethan was quiet a moment. No, he said. No. Never. Not once. I told you the truth last night, Maddie. Nothing's ever fallen on me. I've never been tested a single day of my life. He looked at his own hands, the blisters she'd been right about coming up along his palms. So I don't know if it'll hold. I don't know if I'm the man to make it hold. What I know is that if we do nothing, you lose this ground and your mother and father with it by sundown. And if we run, the valley loses everything by winter. So we bluff. And I find out tonight at last what I'm made of. Same as you found out against that wall at 17. She looked at him a long time. You're scared, she said. It wasn't unkind. I can see it. You hide it good, but I can see it. I'm terrified. Good. She reached across the table and for the first time laid her big work-hard hand over his soft blistered one and left it there. A man who's not scared going up against Victor Hale is a fool, and I've had my fill of fools. But a man who's scared and stays. Her voice thickened. I've never had one of those. Not once. Not my brothers, not my daddy at the end, not a single soul in 25 years. I want you to know that. Whatever happens when it's dark, whatever Hale does, you're the first person who was scared and stayed anyway. For me. Just for me. She squeezed his hand. So we'll bluff Ethan Calloway. And if it doesn't hold, we'll go down owing nobody and standing up and together. Which is more than I ever thought I'd get. Maddie? Don't. She pulled her hand back quick and looked away. Don't say a sweet thing to me right now. I can stand the guns. I can't stand you being kind at me the hour before I lose everything. It'll break me right when I need to be iron, so don't. I wasn't going to be kind. Ethan's voice was rough. I was going to tell you the truth, which is different, and which you asked me for last night. Here it is. I came up this mountain to find out if the woman a man in a tavern described was real or a story. And she's real. She's realer than anything I've touched in my whole life. And I spent 5 years turning away the finest families in the country because not one of those women would have looked at these papers and thought first of her dead father's grief instead of her own drowned fortune. And you did that down in the cellar with your world ending. You grieved for him first. He leaned in. My mother told me to find a woman who'd stand when everything falls. I don't want to marry you to prove her right anymore, Maddie. I'd forgotten I ever came for that. I want to stand next to you tonight because I can't imagine standing anywhere else. That's not kindness. That's the plainest thing I know. She sat very still. You've known me a day, she said, but it came out cracked. I've watched you split wood in a storm muck, a stall feed a stranger lie, a railroad baron into giving you an afternoon, and grieve your father over your own ruin. A day. He shook his head. A day with you's shown me more of a person than 5 years of suppers ever did. So don't tell me a day's not enough. It was enough to know. For a moment, she couldn't speak at all. Then she wiped her face hard twice and stood, because she'd told him she couldn't stand a sweet thing. And here he'd gone and said the sweetest thing anyone had said to her in her life. And if she sat there one more second, She'd come apart. And she'd sworn a long time ago never to come apart in front of a man. "Get the shotgun down for me," she said rough. "It's over the door. And Ethan—" She stopped with her back to him. "When this is over, if we're both still breathing when the sun's up, you can say all that again slow, and I'll sit still and hear it. But not now. Now I need to be iron. Help me be iron." "All right," he said softly. "Iron it is." He got the shotgun down. She loaded it at the table with hands that had steadied, and she set it across her knees, and the two of them sat in the dark and did not light a lamp, watching the two men at the corral rail through the window, waiting for full dark and the first careless one to move. It came the way he'd said it would. The light died the last of the way, and one of the men at the rail stood and stretched and said something to the other and started ambling toward the barn, unbuttoning his coat. A bored man who needed to go behind it. And down the black ridge, so faint at first, she thought her eyes were making it a single point of light caught and held. Then another beside it. Then a third and a fourth spreading out along the dark like stars deciding to come down and stand in a valley. "Ethan?" Maddie's breath stopped. "Look. Oh, look." He looked. "They came," she whispered. "You said they might not. Half of them slammed the door on Eli, you said. But look how many. Look how many came. They came for you, Maddie." Ethan's hand found hers in the dark and gripped it. Every one of those lights is somebody who could have stayed home and told themselves it wasn't their farm this week, and they lit a lantern and walked up your mountain instead. Whatever this valley told you for 25 years about your worth. His voice went hoarse. "There's your real ledger, coming up the ridge one light at a time." She was crying, and she didn't care, and she gripped his hand hard enough to grind the bones. And out in the yard, the bored man reached the corner of the barn and stopped, because he'd seen the lights too, and his voice cut across the dark, high and sudden, and no longer bored at all. "Wake up! Wake up! We got company. We got a whole lot of company coming up the—" "That's it." Ethan breathed and rose and drew Maddie up beside him, with the shotgun in her hands and the papers against her ribs and 30 lanterns climbing toward them out of the dark. "That's it. It's begun. Stand with me, Maddie Reed. Don't blink and don't fire and don't fall. Everything we've got rides on the next hour, and on him drawing first, and on you and me being too many, and too calm, and too right to break." He looked at her, and she looked back, and neither of them looked away. "Are you ready?" "I've been ready 25 years, Maddie Reed said. "Nobody ever came to stand with me till now." And she pulled open her own front door and stepped out onto her porch to meet them. A big overlooked woman with a shotgun and a stranger and a valley full of lights at her back. And out in the dark, the two hired men were shouting, and up the ridge, the lanterns kept on climbing, and somewhere down that road, Victor Hale was turning his gray horse around at the first far cry, not yet knowing that the beaten woman he'd left behind had spent his afternoon lighting the whole world up against him. The two hired men were on their feet now, rifles up, backing toward each other in the middle of the yard, as the lanterns kept climbing, and the nearer one swung his gun toward the porch where Maddie stood. "You!" he barked. "Whatever you done, you call it off. Call it off, or I put you down where you stand." "I can't call off the dark," Maddie said. She did not raise the shotgun. She let it hang in one hand at her side, plain where every climbing light could see. It wasn't pointed at anybody. "And I can't call off my neighbors. They came up on their own feet. You want them gone? You go ask them. But I'd think twice, mister. There's a lot of them, and there's two of you, and every one of them's holding a light and watching what you do next." "Don't," Ethan said low beside her. "Don't answer them anymore. Every word gives them something to be brave against. Just stand. Let the numbers talk." So she stood, and the lanterns came. The first face to catch the light was old man Pruitt, 70, if he was a day, a squirrel gun across his arm, and his jaw set like a fence post. Behind him came the Hendersons, the father and two grown sons. Behind them, the Cobbs. Behind them, men Maddie half knew, and men she didn't know at all, and women too. Women with lanterns held high, and their mouths flat, and children kept back, but their present counted. They did not rush. They did not shout. They came the way Ethan had said to come, quiet and slow and terrible, and spread out along the edges of the yard in a widening ring of light, and the two hired men turned and turned, trying to keep a rifle on all of it at once, and could not. "That's far enough," the nearer man shouted. His voice had gone high. "You people are trespassing on lawful seized prop." "It ain't seized till sundown," old Pruitt said. "The lady got till sundown, your own boss said it, we all heard the story by now." He came one step closer into the light. "It ain't sundown that matters anyhow. Sun's already down. What matters is there's 50 of us and 2 of you, son, and we ain't come to shoot. We come to watch. So put that iron down, and let's all watch together and see how the night goes." 50. Ethan's chest moved. Eli had said 30. 50 had come. "I ain't putting nothing down." "Then hold it," Pruitt said. "Hold it all night. Our arms don't get tired. We're farmers." A low sound moved through the ring of light. It wasn't a laugh exactly. It was worse than a laugh for the 2 hired men, the sound of a great many frightened people discovering all at once and together that they outnumbered the thing they were frightened of. And that was the moment horses came hard up the creek road. Hale, back at a gallop, 4 riders behind him, the gray gelding lathered, and the whole ring of light seemed to draw a breath and hold it as he came into the yard and hauled up and took it in the lanterns. The 50 faces, the woman on the porch who was supposed to be beaten, the city man beside her. For 1 second, Victor Hale's pleasant face was not pleasant at all. For 1 second, every one of the 50 saw exactly what was under it. Then the mask came back down. "Well?" He walked his horse forward a few steps, easy a man arriving at a party. "Quite a gathering, Miss Reed. I'd no idea you were so beloved." His eyes moved over the ring and started doing what those eyes always did, which was counting, pricing, weighing. "Neighbors. I'm glad you're here, in fact. It saves me sending riders. Most of you hold notes with my company. Most of you are behind. What's happening to Miss Reed tonight is what happens to a debt unpaid. And I'd have you see it up close so we needn't do this dance again farm by farm." Nobody moved. Nobody left. The lanterns held. "It's forged Hale." Ethan's voice carried flat across the yard. "Every note. Hers, theirs, all of it. And they know it now. That's why they're standing here instead of hiding in their houses waiting their turn." A serious charge. Hale didn't even look at him. He was still working the crowd with his eyes. "Made by a stranger. A city man nobody here knows, who rode in yesterday, who could be anyone, who could be here to work some swindle of his own on a poor, grieving woman's land. Have any of you thought of that? How well do you know the man telling you your debts are forged? He let it sit. You've known me 2 years. I've bought your corn. I've held your paper when the banks wouldn't. And now a stranger in a fine coat tells you a story, and you're ready to point guns at the law for him." And Ethan felt it. The thing turning. Felt the ring of light waver, felt the doubt move through 50 frightened people who had come up a mountain on the word of a millboy and a stranger, and were now being asked reasonably in a pleasant voice whether they were fools. It was a good play. Ethan had to give him that. It was a very good play. Maddie stepped forward off the porch. "He didn't tell them Hale," she said. "I did, and I got the proof to tell it with." Ethan's hand shot out to stop her and missed. "Maddie, it's the only card we've got, and he's about to talk them off my mountain," she said low and fast, and then louder to all of them. "My father found it 2 years ago. What Hale's really after? It ain't the corn, and it ain't the debt. The debt's a lie he built to get the rest. There's coal under this valley, under my low field, and under half your farms. A seam that runs for miles worth more money than any of us ever dreamed. And Victor Hale means to forge every one of you off your land cheap and dig it out and get rich on ground your grandfathers cleared." She held up the oilcloth bundle for the whole ring to see. "My daddy proved it. Names, dates, the men Hale paid to lie the survey, all of it. Right here, in my 2 hands." The yard went dead silent. And Victor Hale's pleasant mask did not slip this time. It fell off entirely, and what stood in the saddle was a cold, hard animal, that had just seen the one thing in the world it could not allow to exist being held up in the lantern light by a woman he'd taken for beaten. "Deacons," Hale said quietly. The gray man was already moving. "Deacons," Hale said again, and now there was iron under it. "Take those papers." "Hale, don't!" Ethan stepped in front of Maddie, and his voice cut hard across the yard so every lantern could hear it. "You put a hand on her in front of 50 witnesses, and you're done. Not the farm. You. There's your murder, there's your headline, there's the Capitol Marshals. You've spent 2 years and a fortune keeping off this valley. 50 people just heard the word coal. You can't unsay it. You can't buy back 50 people who all heard it at once. It's out, Hale. It's been out 1 minute and you'll never get it back in." Hale's eyes flicked to the ring of faces calculating, and Ethan watched him do the math. A rich man does. Watched him weigh the coal against the witnesses, and for one held breath, it could have gone either way. Then Hale smiled, and it was the worst thing yet, because it was a smile that had found a third door. "You're right," Hale said. "I can't take the papers by force, not in front of good people." He swung down off the gray slow hands open reasonable. "So I'll buy them. Miss Reed, that coal you speak of, if it's real, and I've no notion whether it is, you understand, but if it's real, then you're sitting on a fortune, aren't you? And you're 3 seasons behind on your mortgage and about to lose everything." He spread his hands to the crowd, generous the picture of a fair man. $10,000. Tonight. Cash or a bank draft any of you can watch me sign. For the papers and the farm both. And I'll forgive every debt in this valley on top of it. The Pruitt note, the Henderson note, all of it torn up tonight in front of you. He turned back to Maddie. "You walk off this mountain rich, Miss Reed, and every neighbor you brought up here walks home owing nothing. Or you can hold those papers, and we can all find out together whether 50 farmers really will die for another man's dirt." And there it was. Ethan felt the ring of light shift again harder this time. Because Hale had done the cruelest thing a clever man can do, he'd offered to save all of them at the price of one woman's papers, and now every family on that mountain was doing its own quiet arithmetic in the dark. Forgiveness of every debt. No more fear. Just hand over a bundle of paper and go home free. "Maddie?" Old Pruitt's voice came rough out of the crowd. He would not look at her. "Maddie, that's every debt in the valley. My grandkids. I got my grandkids' farm on that note." He swallowed hard. "I ain't saying do it. I'm saying God forgive me. I'm saying I'd understand if you did." "He's lying, Mr. Pruitt," Ethan said. "Course he might be. But 10,000's real if it's cash and my note's real and I'm an old man." Pruitt's voice cracked. "I come up here to stand with you, Maddie. I did. But he's offering to save my grandkids, and all you got to do is hand him a stack of paper. Stop." Maddie's voice was quiet, but it cut him off clean. She was looking at the bundle in her hands. Then she looked up and looked at Hale, and something had gone very still and very clear in her face. "You'd forgive every debt. Torn up tonight. In front of everybody." "Everyone." Hale's eyes gleamed. He thought he had her. "You have my word." "Your word?" Maddie almost laughed. "Mr. Your word is what's written on these papers. Your word is $40 to a man named Deacons to swear a lie in front of a notary. I've read your word tonight. It's the cheapest thing in this valley." She turned to the crowd, and her voice rose and steadied and rang. "He's not offering to save you. He's offering to buy the one proof that could put him in prison and free every one of us forever, and he's offering to buy it with your fear. $10,000 and torn up notes, and next spring when the stranger's gone, and I've spent the money and this paper's ash in Hale's stove, what stops him forging you all over again? Nothing. Nothing but this." She held the bundle higher. "This is the only thing on God's earth Victor Hale is afraid of. That's how I know it's worth more than $10,000. Because he offered. A man like Hale don't offer to buy a thing that can't hurt him." Silence. And then old Pruitt, the 70-year-old, lowered his head a second and raised it and stepped up beside her out of the crowd and cocked his squirrel gun. "No," he said to Hale. "You keep your 10,000. I kept my grandkids' farm 40 years without your money. I'll keep it another 40 without it too. He spat. "The lady's right. That paper's the only law we got, and we ain't selling the law." And the ring of light held. And then it tightened, men and women stepping in from the dark, closing the circle until the four riders and Hale and the gray gelding stood in a shrinking pool of ground, ringed all the way round by 50 lanterns, and 50 hard faces, and a great many guns that were not any of them pointed at anybody, and did not need to be. Hale stood very still in the middle of it. "Deacons," he said a third time, soft as a snake. "The papers, now." The gray man moved fast, faster than a man that lean should move, straight at Maddie, with his hand going to his hip, and Ethan hit him. He'd never thrown a punch in his soft, rich life, and he threw this one with everything. 5 years of emptiness had stored up in him. Caught Deacon square as the man's gun cleared leather, and the two of them went down hard in the dirt, and the gun went off. The shot cracked across the yard like the sky splitting. For one horrible held second, nobody knew who was hit. Maddie screamed his name. The ring of light surged. And then Ethan came up onto his knees in the dirt with Deacon's smoking pistol in his own 2 hands, having wrenched it loose as they fell, and Deacon's lay under him, clutching a broke wrist, and the shot had gone into the dirt, into nothing, into the ground, but it didn't matter because it had been fired. Ethan came to his feet and turned to the whole ring of light, and his voice tore out of him raw and ringing. "There it is. You all saw it. His man drew first. His man fired first in front of all of you over a bundle of paper. Not us, him." He turned on Hale, and the pistol hung useless at his side because he didn't need it. Now he had something better. You needed it clean. You needed to be the law, and your own man just fired the first shot in front of 50 witnesses, and His voice caught and rose, and he flung his arm toward the creek road, where a lone rider had come up quiet in the dark, during all of it, and sat his horse at the edge of the light, with a crooked star catching the lantern glow. In front of the sheriff. "Isn't that right, Sheriff Coombs?" Every head turned. Bill Coombs sat his horse at the edge of the light, and his face was gray, and his hand rested on his own gun, and the whole valley waited to see which way a bought man would fall. "Coombs." Hale's voice was very quiet and very deadly. "You know what you owe me. You know exactly what you owe me. Arrest the stranger for assaulting my man, and arrest the woman for receiving stolen company documents, and this ends tonight the way it was always going to end." Coombs didn't move. "They told me," Coombs said slowly on the way up, "a boy come running with a message. Said the proof of the forgery was real, and copies was already made and give to men you can't reach." He swallowed. "That true city man copies made. And Ethan Calloway, who had bluffed a man's search, and bluffed a man's fear, and bluffed his way through the longest day of his life, looked the sheriff in the eye, and gambled everything on one more. Made and sent," Ethan said, steady as stone, "before dark, to a federal marshal in the capital and an editor at the territorial paper. Your name's not in them, Sheriff. Not yet. Whether it goes in depends entirely on what you do in the next 10 seconds. It was a lie. There were no copies. No marshal, no editor, no writer carrying them. There was only a bundle of oilcloth in a farm woman's hands, and a boy who'd run fast, and a sheriff $900 in a dead man's debt. But Bill Coombs didn't know that. And a bought man staring down a prison cell will always reach for the door a smart man leaves open for him. Coombs looked at Hale. He looked at the 50 lanterns. He looked at Maddie Reed, whose daddy's coffin he had carried, whose table he had eaten at more Sundays than he could count. And then Bill Coombs took a long breath and drew his gun and turned it slow and certain on Victor Hale. "Victor Hale," he said, and his voice shook and then steadied, and finally, after 2 years, rang clean. "You're under arrest, for forgery, for fraud, and for a man of yours firing on unarmed folks in front of half this county. Tell your riders to drop their guns, right now, or God help me, I'll step aside and let these 50 people do what I should have had the sand to do 2 years ago." For a moment the whole yard hung on a wire. 4 riders with their hands near their holsters, 50 lanterns, a sheriff's gun on their boss, and Victor Hale in the middle of it, the cold animal behind his eyes, measuring the last odds it would ever get to measure. "You're a dead man, Coombs," Hale said softly. You and every soul on this hill. You think a coal seam worth millions has no friends? You think this ends because a fat woman and a runaway rich boy? It ends, Maddie said, because you're standing in the one place your money can't reach you, in the middle of the people you robbed. Look around, Mr. Hale. There's not a dollar in this whole yard, and there's not a man here you can buy tonight, and that's the one kind of room you never learned how to stand in. She came down the last porch step toward him with the bundle held against her chest and 50 lights at her back, and for the first time in 25 years, Martha Reed was the biggest thing in the yard, and knew it. Tell your men to drop the guns. My neighbors are tired and it's cold, and nobody here wants to bury anybody. But we will hold this circle till the sun comes up and the marshals come down that road, and you know it because you can count the same as me. Hale looked at her. He looked at the ring. He looked at the gun in Coombs's shaking, steadying hand. And Victor Hale, who had bought a Valley One forged signature at a time, did the arithmetic one last time, and found for the first time in his life that there was no sum he could offer that 50 lanterns would take. Down, he said to his riders through his teeth. Put them down. 4 pistols hit the dirt. The ring of light did not cheer. It only breathed one long, ragged, valley-wide breath, and then it closed the last of the way. Gentle now. Careful farmers and their wives moving in to gather the guns and hold the riders, and stand between Victor Hale and the road he had ridden up so pleasant 3 hours before. Old Pruitt kept his squirrel gun on Deacon's. Eli, who had run the whole valley on his own 2 legs, pushed through the crowd white-faced, and found Maddie and grabbed her arm just to be sure she was real. And Maddie Reed stood in the middle of the circle of light she had raised out of nothing with her father's proof against her heart, and her mother's ground under her feet, and Victor Hale disarmed in front of her. And she did not feel triumph, not yet only a great shaking wonder that she was still standing, that the ground was still hers, that the world had tried once more to break her and had not. She turned and found Ethan. He was still holding Deakins' pistol, and his knuckles were split from the one punch he'd thrown in his life, and there was dirt down the whole front of the fine coat that Hale had priced from clear across the yard, and he was looking at her the way no one had ever once looked at her in her life. You stood, he said. His voice was wrecked. Everything fell on you tonight, and you stood. My mother... He stopped and shook his head and couldn't finish it. My mother would have... Don't. She was crying and laughing both. Don't you dare say a sweet thing to me in front of the whole valley, Ethan Calloway, I told you. I'll come apart. Then come apart, he said. You've earned it. God knows you've earned it. There's 50 people here to hold you up if you do. And out at the edge of the light, Sheriff Bill Coombs kept his gun on Victor Hale's back, and the lanterns burned. And up the dark road, there were no marshals coming. Yet. No editor. No copies. Only a lie Ethan had told, and a valley willing to stand behind it till morning. And every soul in that yard knew, without a word, that the holding of the circle was not finished, that a man like Hale disarmed was still a man like Hale, and that the night, however it had turned, was not yet over. The circle held. That was the thing that mattered, and the thing that was hardest, because a circle of frightened farmers holding lanterns in the dark is not a thing that holds itself. It has to be held minute by minute, and Ethan learned that fast. They tied Hale's 4 riders wrist to wrist with plow line and sat them against the corral rail under old Pruitt's squirrel gun. They took Deacon's broke wrist and bound it and sat him apart from the others, because Ethan did not forget for 1 second what Maddie's father had written about the quiet one, and neither did she. And they put Victor Hale in a kitchen chair, carried out into the middle of the yard, in the center of the ring, where 50 lanterns could watch him and he could watch them, and Sheriff Coombs stood over him with a gun that no longer shook. You should send for the marshals now. Hale said pleasant again, the mask back on. The real ones, not the ones this gentleman invented. His eyes found Ethan across the light. Oh, don't look surprised. I've been reading men my whole life. There are no copies. There's no editor, no marshal writing a draft down from the Capitol. You made it up on the spot, and it was well done, I'll grant you, but the sun comes up in a few hours, and when it does, you'll have exactly 1 bundle of paper and no way to get it anywhere I can't reach it. and I have a great deal of reach. Don't answer him, Maddie said quietly. I'm not going to. Ethan didn't look away from Hale. He's doing to us what he did to the crowd, finding the doubt and pressing on it. He wants us arguing about copies instead of holding the circle. He raised his voice easy for the whole ring to hear. Nobody talks to the prisoner, not one word. He's got a silver tongue, and it's the only weapon he's got left, so we take it from him by not listening. Anybody wants to talk, talk to your neighbor. Talk about your farm. Talk about the spring planting. But not to him. And that more than the guns was what broke Victor Hale's last plan, because a man like Hale is only dangerous when someone is listening, and 50 people who had been afraid of him for 2 years discovered over the long cold hours of that night that they did not have to listen anymore. But holding a circle is one thing at midnight, and another thing at 3 in the morning. By 3, the children had been carried home by the older women, and the men who'd come without coats were shivering, and the lanterns were burning low on oil, and Ethan watched the ring loosen at the edges, the way tired things loosen. A man near the barn sat down. Another drifted toward the road, telling himself he'd just check on his own place and come right back. And Ethan understood cold in his gut that Hale was not waiting for morning. Hale was waiting for exactly this. For the circle to get tired. For the numbers to thin. For one gap to open in the dark. Ethan! Maddie had come up beside him. She'd seen it too. We're losing them. Not their hearts. Their bodies. They're tired and it's cold and half of them got stock to tend at dawn. I know it. If that circle thins enough for his riders to make a rush. I know it, Maddie. He rubbed his face. 50 was never going to last till dawn. I knew that when I said it. I was buying hours same as you bought hours this afternoon. The question's what we buy with the hours we bought. You need a real edge, not a bluff. He's already called the bluff on the copies. And Ethan looked at her, and something moved behind his eyes, and he said slow, Then we make the bluff true. What? The copies. He turned to her fast now, urgent. He's right that there aren't any, so we make some, right now, tonight. Maddie, how many people in this valley can read and write a clear hand? She blinked. A fair number. School teachers here somewhere, Miss Ada. The Henderson boys had schooling. Eli reads. Then we don't have one bundle of paper anymore. Ethan's voice dropped quick and hard. We have 10. 20. We sit every literate soul in that house down at your table with your father's papers, and we copy them out, every receipt, every name, the survey, all of it by hand in the next 3 hours, and every copy gets carried home by a different family to a different hiding place before the sun's up. Hale can reach one bundle. He cannot reach 20 bundles scattered across 20 farms in 20 root cellars. That's not a bluff anymore. That's just true. And the second it's true, he gestured at the tied riders at Hale in his chair. All of this stops mattering because it won't matter if he gets loose. It won't matter if his friends come, the proof's already everywhere, and there's no putting it back. Maddie stared at him for 1 second. Then she turned and started calling names into the dark. They worked by lamplight in her small house. Miss Ada, the school teacher, and the 2 Henderson boys, and Eli and 3 farm wives with fair hands. And Maddie herself bent over the table copying her dead father's careful letters, one word at a time, while Ethan read the originals aloud in a low, steady voice, and stood every few minutes to look out at the yard and make sure the circle still held. And it was slow, and their hands cramped, and twice Miss Ada's old eyes lost the light, and she had to stop and rub them and go on, but the copies grew. 1 became 4. 4 became 9. And Hale, watching the lamp burn in the window across the yard, understood what was happening in there, and for the first time all night, the pleasant mask cracked from the inside. Coombs! He kept his voice low, private, just between the two of them. Bill, listen to me. I'll forgive it. The 900. Right now tonight I'll call it square, and I'll add 1,000 on top, and all you have to do is walk into that house and put your boot on those papers before they finish. 1 man, 1 boot. You've the badge to do it lawful. Say they're stolen company property and take them, and this whole night comes apart. He watched the sheriff's face. "You're going to hang otherwise, Bill. You know that. You arrested me tonight, but there's 100 ways this goes wrong for a bought sheriff between here and a courtroom. I'm the only man alive who can promise you it goes right." And Bill Coombs, God help him, looked at the lamp in the window and then down at Hale, and the old fear moved in his face. 2 years of debt and fear don't wash off in one brave hour, and for a long, terrible moment, the muzzle of his gun drifted an inch off Victor Hale's chest. Maddie saw it through the window. She came out of that house so fast, she near took the door off and crossed the yard, and put herself between the sheriff and the prisoner, and she did not raise her voice, which was somehow worse than if she had. "Bill Coombs." She looked at him steady. "You look at me, not him. You carried my daddy's coffin. You remember what he weighed? You remember stumbling on the church step and catching it, and my mother put her hand on your arm and said, 'Thank you, Bill.' He'd have hated to be dropped. You remember that." Coombs' throat worked. "Maddie, he's telling you you'll hang. Maybe you will. I don't know. But I know this. If you take those papers tonight, you hang a coward, and every soul in this valley knows it, and your grandchildren grow up in a county that says Bill Coombs sold it all for a torn-up note. And if you stand where you're standing, gun on the man who bought you, and you see it through to the marshals." Her voice dropped. "Then whatever a court does to you, you die a man who turned. That's the only choice he left you, Bill. Not whether you pay for what you done. You'll pay either way. Just what you are when you pay it." And Bill Coombs looked at her a long moment, and then he did the bravest thing he had done in 2 years, which was a small thing. Just a straightening of the arm, the muzzle coming back to rest square and steady over Victor Hale's heart. "You're right," he said hoarse. "God forgive me for how long it took. You're right." He didn't look at Hale again. "Not another word out of you, Victor. I mean it. You talk again and I'll gag you with your own fine necktie in front of everybody." Hale said nothing, but his eyes went to the window, to the lamp, to the papers multiplying inside. And Ethan, watching from the doorway, saw the exact moment the richest man in the state understood that he had lost not the fight in the yard, but the war under the ground, because you cannot forge your way back. A secret, once 50 people know it, and 20 copies carry it home in the dark. By first gray light, the copies were done. 9 of them in 9 fair hands, and Maddie gave them out herself at the door, one to each family she trusted with hers, and she told each of them the same thing. Hide it where you'd hide your own life, and don't dig it up till a real marshal asks for it by name. And they took them, these tired, frightened people, and they went home down the mountain in the dawn with the proof folded in their coats, and every step they took carried Victor Hale's ruin farther out of his reach. And it was nearly done. That was when it almost came apart. Because Deacons the Quiet One, the man Maddie's father had warned her about from the grave, had spent the whole long night working his bound wrists against the plow line with the patience of a man who was only ever dangerous when nobody was watching. And in the gray confusion of dawn, with families leaving and the circle at its very thinnest, and everyone's eyes on the road, he got loose. He came up out of the dirt without a sound, and he did not go for a gun, and he did not go for the road. He went for Maddie and the bundle of originals in her hands, because a man like Deacons understood that copies could be denied and disputed. But the originals in her father's own hand were the thing that hanged them all, and he crossed the yard in 6 long strides with a knife he'd had in his boot the whole night, and nobody saw him but Eli. Eli, the mill boy, 20 years old, who had run the whole valley on his own legs and been afraid the whole time and done it anyway. Eli saw him, and Eli had no gun, and there was no time to shout. So Eli did the only thing there was time to do, which was throw his whole body into the path of the knife. They went down together in the dirt, 3 feet from Maddie. And then the whole yard was shouting at once, and men were piling on, and Ethan was there, and old Pruitt was there, and they dragged Deacons off and pinned him and wrenched the knife away. And for one sick moment nobody knew, and Maddie was on her knees in the dirt with Eli's head in her lap, and there was blood. Eli, look at me, boy. Did he? Eli's face was white and screwed up with pain. The papers, did he get the? No, he didn't get anything. You stopped him. You hear me? You stopped him. Her hands were shaking as she pulled his coat open, and she found the wound, and she found a long, shallow cut along the ribs, bleeding bad ugly, but not deep. Not the deep killing thrust it would have been if the boy hadn't turned as he fell. "It's not deep." "Oh, thank God, Eli, it's not deep. You're going to be fine, you crazy fool boy, you're going to be just fine." And Eli, 20 years old, bleeding in the dirt, grinned up at her, white and shaking, and said, "Then quit crying on me, Maddie. You're worse than my own ma." And the whole yard wound tight as a fiddle string for 11 hours, broke into the ragged, half-hysterical laughter of people who have just watched a boy nearly die and not die. They got Eli inside and bound him up proper, and Miss Ada sat with him, and he'd be sore for a month and proud of the scar for the rest of his life. And deacons, they tied hand and foot this time, and gagged, and set apart, and Ethan stood over the quiet gray man a long moment and said low, "Her father warned her about you from his grave. Wrote your name down so she'd know your face. You spent this whole night waiting for the one gap, and the gap you found had a millboy in it." He crouched down. "That's the thing your kind never counts. You count the money and the guns and the tired men. You never count the ones who'll throw their own body in front of a knife for somebody who was kind to them once. There's no ledger for that. And it's the thing that beats you every time." Deacon said nothing. There was nothing to say. And then, in the full light of morning, with the valley gone quiet, and the fight over, and the proof scattered safe across 20 farms, they finally heard the thing Ethan had invented in a lie the night before come true down the road, the sound of horses. A lot of horses. Coming up steady, and unhurried, and official. Maddie went to the porch. Ethan came and stood beside her. And up the creek road, in the clean morning light, came 4 riders. They had never seen before Dusty from hard travel, and the man in front wore a badge that was not crooked, and not bought a federal marshal's star real as sunrise. Ethan stared. "I never sent for them. There was no rider. I made it up." "You made it up." Maddie's voice was strange. "But somebody didn't." The marshal drew up in the yard and took in the whole of it, the tied men, the disarmed riders Victor Hale, sitting gray and silent in a kitchen chair, the exhausted farmers, the schoolteacher in the doorway, the boy inside with the bandaged ribs. And he looked down at Maddie and Ethan on the porch, and he said, "I'm looking for a Martha Reed, and I'm looking for whoever's been buying up half this county with forged paper. Appears I've found them both in one place, which is convenient." He swung down. "Been riding 3 days on a tip. Fellow named Reed, no wait." He checked a paper. "Widow Cobb. Sent a letter to the territorial office 2 months back. Said her neighbor Reed had proof of a forgery ring, but was too scared to bring it in, and she was scared too, but she couldn't sleep for it anymore." He looked at Maddie. "Took us a while to come. Territory's big. I'm sorry it took as long as it did, ma'am. Looks like it near got here too late." And Maddie put her hand over her mouth, because old Cobb's widow, quiet gray-haired Mrs. Cobb, whose farm was one of the forged ones who had lain awake 2 months with a secret too big for her, had done the one thing Maddie's own father had been too afraid to do. She had sent the letter. She had done it scared. And she had never told a living soul, and she had stood in the ring of lanterns all last night, holding her light, and never said a word about it. And the marshals Ethan had invented out of desperation had been real all along, 3 days down the road coming. "She never said," Maddie whispered. "She stood right there all night, and she never said she'd sent for you." "Woman like that doesn't say," the marshal said. "She just does it, and hopes it's enough, and figures the credit can go to whoever's still standing when help arrives." He looked around the yard at the 20 empty places where families had already gone home with copies in their coats at the disarmed empire, sitting in a kitchen chair. "Though from the looks of things, ma'am, you'd have held without me. Somebody built this. Somebody turned a scared valley into that." He nodded at the circle's cold lanterns. "That's not luck. That's somebody who knew what he was doing." "He didn't know what he was doing," Maddie said, and she reached over and took Ethan's split-knuckled hand in hers in front of the marshal and the whole yard, and did not care who saw. He'd never done a hard thing in his life before yesterday, He told me so himself. He just decided to be scared and stay anyway. Turns out that's most of what knowing what you're doing ever is. The marshal put Victor Hale in irons himself, and Hale, being led to a horse at last, stopped level with the porch and looked up at Maddie Reed one final time, and the pleasant mask was gone for good now, and what was underneath just looked tired and old and beaten, in a way money had never taught it how to be. "A fat farm woman," he said, quiet, almost wondering. 2 years of planning, a fortune spent, and it comes apart in one night over a fat farm woman and a rich fool and a boy who runs errands. "You had it backwards the whole time, Mr. Hale," Maddie said. "That's why you lost. You looked at all of us and saw what the world told you to see. A fat girl, a soft, rich boy, a simple mill hand, a scared old widow." She stepped to the edge of the porch. "And every single one of us turned out to be exactly the thing you priced at nothing. That's your ledger, mister. You spent your whole life pricing people, and you got every last one of us wrong." They led him down this mountain, and the sun came up full over the valley, and it was at last a morning, and the ground under Maddie Reed's feet was still her own. The reckoning came slow, the way real things do, over the weeks that followed, and it was not one great moment, but 100 small ones, stacked one on another, until the world had changed, and nobody could point to the day it turned. The territorial court sat in January. Maddie went down the mountain to it in her mother's blue dress, the one she'd sworn she'd burned at 17. She'd told the story wrong all these years, or the burning hadn't taken, because there it was, pressed and mended, and she wore it into a courtroom full of the men who'd spent 2 years afraid of Victor Hale, and she laid her father's originals on the table, in front of a real judge, and she told the whole of it in a plain, steady voice that did not shake once. Hale's lawyers were expensive and clever, and they tried. God knew they tried to make her the thief, and her father the debtor, and the whole valley a mob. And then the 20 copies came out. One by one the families walked in from their farms, the Hendersons' old Pruitt, the Cobb widow. 20 households each with a copy dug up from wherever they'd hid their own life, each in a different hand, each identical to the last. And the clever lawyers looked at 20 matching copies of the thing they'd spent a fortune trying to bury. And they stopped being clever because there is no lie big enough to swallow 20 witnesses who copied the truth out by hand in the dark. Deacons turned on Hale to save his own neck, which surprised no one and mattered anyway. Victor Hale went to a federal prison for a long time, and his company was broken up, and the coal that 50 families had nearly died over in the dark, stayed under the ground where it was unmined, because the court gave the mineral rights to the people who owned the land above it, which was the valley, which was them. And Bill Coombs stood up in that same courtroom of his own free will and told the judge exactly what he'd done, and exactly what he'd owed, and exactly how long he'd worn a bought star, and he asked for no mercy. The judge gave him some anyway, a lighter thing than he'd have gotten if he'd hidden it, because a man who turns himself in is a different creature than a man who's caught. And Coombs did his time, and when he came out, the valley took him back slow and wary at first, and then all the way, because Maddie Reed stood up at the church the Sunday he returned and said in front of everyone, "This man had every reason to sell us, and every chance, and at the end he chose right. I'll not have him spoken ill of in my hearing." And after that, nobody did. Eli healed. He wore the scar along his ribs the rest of his life and showed it to anyone who'd look, and the story grew in the telling. The way the tavern man had once predicted stories grow, until by summer he'd fought off 6 men with a knife in each hand, and Maddie let him have it, because a boy who throws his body in front of a blade for you has earned whatever version of the tale he wants to tell. But that was all the outside of it. The inside of it, the part that mattered to Ethan Calloway, happened smaller and quieter on the mountain over that long winter while the valley healed around them. He didn't leave. That was the first thing. The morning after the marshals took Hale, when it would have been the most natural thing in the world for a rich man to gather his fine coat and his 2 horses and ride back to the life that was waiting for him. Ethan Calloway walked out to the barn and started mucking the stalls badly, the way she'd taught him, and Maddie stood in the door and watched him and said, "You know you don't have to do that." "I know. You've got a house back east, a business, an aunt you said pushing letters at you." "I do. So why are you shoveling my stalls, Ethan?" He straightened up and leaned on the fork and looked at her. And there was hay in his hair and a healing split across his knuckles, and nothing at all left of the man who'd ridden up her mountain 3 months back, not knowing what a single thing in his life was for. "Because you told me that night before the guns," he said, "that when it was over, if we were both still breathing, I could say all of it again slow, and you'd sit still and hear it." He set the fork down. "We're both still breathing. And I've been up since dawn trying to work up the nerve, which is a funny thing because I stood in front of Victor Hale's guns without half this much fear in me." Maddie came into the barn and sat down on an upturned bucket and folded her hands in her lap and said, "All right, I'm sitting still. I'm hearing it." And Ethan told her. Slow this time, the way he'd promised. He told her that he'd spent 5 years unable to say what a single thing in his life was for, and that he'd known what it was for the moment he'd watched her split wood in a thunderstorm, and not once look up to see if he was impressed. He told her his mother had sent him to find a woman who'd stand when everything falls, and that he'd found her, but that somewhere in the finding it had stopped being about proving his mother right, and started being about the plain fact that he could not imagine a single morning of the rest of his life that he wanted to wake up anywhere but where she was. He told her he was not offering to save her, because she'd never needed saving, and he knew it now, had watched her not need it for one whole terrible night. He was offering to stand next to her. That was all. For as long as she'd have him. "That's the whole of it," he said. "I've no fine speech. I used up all my smooth talking on Hale. This is just true." Maddie was quiet a long moment. "You've got money," she said finally. "A great deal of it." "I do. I don't want it. I've told you that from the first night. I'll not be a woman a man fixed." "I know. That's half of why I'm asking. You're the only person I ever met who didn't want the money." He almost smiled. "Keep the farm in your name. Keep the ledger honest. Keep it yours. I'll not put $1 into this ground you don't ask me for. I'll learn to shovel and I'll learn to split, and I'll be bad at both for years, and you'll laugh at me, and that's the life I'm asking for. Not to give you mine, to live yours, next to you." And Maddie Reed, who had stood against a wall at 17 and heard 2 men argue over who'd have to dance with her, who had held 40 acres alone through 3 killing winters, who had lied a railroad baron out of an afternoon and raised 50 lanterns out of the dark and buried her whole family and been called ox and draft animal and workhorse by a whole valley for 25 years. Maddie Reed put her face in her big work-hard hands and finally came apart. Ethan crossed the barn and knelt down in the straw in front of the bucket and did not touch her, just knelt there close and let her. "I spent my whole life," she said, muffled, wrecked, being the strong one, the one who don't need anybody, because needing was how you got hurt, and I got hurt young, and I decided I'd just never need again, and I built my whole self on it. And it worked. It kept me standing." She lowered her hands, and her face was streaming, and she didn't hide it. "And then you walked in out of a storm, and now I'm sitting on a bucket in my own barn needing you so bad I can't hardly breathe, and it's the most terrifying thing that's ever happened to me. Ethan Calloway, more than Hale, more than any of it, because Hale could only take my land. And I could take more," he said quietly. "You could take everything. That's what needing is." She looked at him. "So when I answer you, I want you to understand what it's costing me. I'm not a woman who says yes easy. I'm a woman who's been alone so long it's the only thing I know how to survive. Saying yes to you means unlearning the one thing that kept me alive." "Then don't say it," Ethan said. "Not today, not till you're ready. I told you for as long as it takes. I waited 5 years and rode 3 months to find you. I can wait for you to trust me. I've nowhere I'd rather be than right here waiting." And that was the thing that undid the last of it. Not a grand gesture. Not the money, not the standing against Hale, not any of it. Just a man kneeling in her straw, telling her he would wait, telling her there was nowhere he'd rather be than exactly where she was for as long as she needed. Because in 25 years, no one had ever once told Maddie Reed that she was worth waiting for. "You crazy fool," she whispered. "You'd wait. I'd wait. You'd wait a year, 2 years, 10. However long it took. I already told you what I'm made of. Turns out it's mostly stubbornness." His voice cracked. "I'm not going anywhere, Maddie. Not up the mountain, not down it. This is the first place I've ever wanted to stay. So take your time. I'll be in the barn shoveling badly whenever you're ready." Maddie Reed looked at this man kneeling in the straw of the barn her father built, the first person in her whole life who had been afraid, and stayed anyway, who had stood beside her when the whole world came up her mountain to break her, who was offering now not to save her, or fix her, or price her, but simply to wait, and she found that the words she had been unable to get past her throat. Her whole guarded life came out after all, small and cracked and absolutely certain. "You won't have to wait," she said. "God help you, Ethan Calloway. The answer's yes. It's been yes since the coffee went cold. I was just too scared to say it." He came up off his knees, and she came up off the bucket, and they met in the middle of the barn, and she was bigger than him, and stronger than him, and had held more weight in her life than he would ever be asked to carry. And he held on to her like a man who'd finally, after 35 years of everything and nothing, come home. They married in the spring under an open sky on the ground her mother was buried under, and her father had died to keep. The whole valley came not out of fear the way they'd once done everything, but out of love, which most of them were still learning how to do out loud. Old Pruitt gave her away because there was no one else left to, and he wept the whole way, and pretended it was his eyes. Eli stood up as best man with his scar and his six-knife story. Miss Ada led the singing. The Cobb widow, who had saved them all with a letter, and never once asked for the credit, sat in the front row in her Sunday black, and smiled the whole time and said nothing, because that was her way. Bill Coombs came too out of prison by then, and stood at the back where he thought he belonged, and Maddie walked over before the vows, and took his arm, and moved him up to the second row, where the family sat, and did not explain it to anybody, and dared anyone with her eyes to ask. And when the preacher asked who took this woman, Ethan Calloway looked out over the whole gathered valley. The people who had once let her stand alone against a wall. The people who had come up her mountain in the dark. The people who were still learning what she'd been worth all along. And he did not just say the words. He turned to all of them first, and he said loud enough for every soul to hear, "My mother told me before she died to find a woman who'd stand when everything falls. She said, don't marry soft, don't marry pretty, don't marry a girl who's never had the ground go out from under her because you'll never know what she's made of. Find one who's already been broke against something and didn't break." His voice rang across the valley. "I looked for 3 years. I looked in the finest houses in the country. And I found her here on a mountain everyone had written off, splitting her own wood in a storm, needing no one wanted, by no one worth more than every one of them put together." He turned back to Maddie. "So, yes, before God and this whole valley, yes. I take this woman. Not because she needs me. Because in a world full of people who bend, she is the one who stood." And Maddie Reed, who the world had looked at once and decided wasn't wanted, stood in her mother's blue dress on her father's ground, with a valley full of love at her back, and married the man who had been afraid and stayed. She had lost her parents. She had nearly lost the farm. She had lost 25 years to a world that priced her at nothing. But she had never once through any of it lost the one thing that turned out to be worth more than beauty or money or belonging or safety. She had never lost herself. Ethan Calloway had ridden out to find a perfect, noble wife, and he had found something far greater. He had found a woman who stood steady when the whole world tried to break her and never fell, and in standing with her, he had finally at last found out exactly what he himself was made of. The overlooked woman was the strongest one of all, and in the end, the whole valley knew it.